welcome back to another episode of the Table Network podcast. We've got an awesome episode today with Dr. John Delony. John, thanks so much for being on here.
Dude, thanks for letting me dip my toe back in Texas for a minute. It's awesome.
Come on. Hey, we're excited to have you here in person for the conference in early October. Maybe have a beer and share some breakfast tacos.
I can eat my body weight in Texas breakfast tacos, so I can't wait, man. Can't wait.
I don't know how other people live without breakfast tacos.
Listen, I tell everybody proudly, coming from like living 40 years in Texas to Nashville, and I say this with all due respect, Nashville, I mean, Tennessee is the best parts of Texas. I call it a rational Texas. It's just not for people in pain.
Yeah.
And the only catch is the Mexican food and the breakfast tacos. Just can't even come close. It's been like a sad grieving process for me. If somebody wants to open like a Rosa's or something here in Nashville, you'll make $1 billion. I just tell you.
Well, we were just talking about Rosa's. The bean and cheese chorizo breakfast taco is to die for.
Dude, I like to rub them on my face. Dude, I rub them all over my face. They're so good.
Knit together a blanket of Listen, this is brought to you by Rosa's.
With queso. I know. Well, congratulations, Rosa's here from Free Advertising, but man, they're good.
Man, John, okay, and this is already hitting on one of the things that I love about you. Credentialed, man. You got degrees out the wazoo. You got more letters after your name than I have in my name. But you're also just a down-to-earth guy who's on mission to help people live integrated lives, to combat some of the ideas that we've built around mental health. And I just really appreciate that. So I'm excited to
appreciate that. That I hope when it's all said and done, like, you gotta get a sticker on the back of your car when you finish a marathon. It just says like 26.2. Like, nobody knows how fast you were in that thing. And so
that's true.
Graduate school is very similar. Like, nobody knows what you studied or how you studied it or how long you studied. So I hope at the end of my life, that's the least important thing about me. I'm much happier about being a good husband and being a good dad and being a good friend and being prepared for the one day Metallica calls and it's like, we need another guitarist now. I'll be like, I'm ready. I'm way more into that than I am the fact that I didn't have a lot of friends in my 20s and spent a lot of time writing papers.
I love it. Can you just share a little bit of your journey? Started in Houston, you're in Nashville now, went by way of Lubbock and higher education.
Yeah, so I grew up in Houston. My dad was a homicide detective and a SWAT hostage negotiator, so he's a bad dude. And then my mom was a stay-at-home mom for most of my childhood until I entered high school, and then she took one community college class and then one more, and then the next semester she took one more, and she ended up graduating with her PhD at 57, and then she became a tenured professor at the age of 63. So she worked at Enron until that mysteriously vanished one night, and so my dad halfway through my childhood, quit being a cop and became a minister. So I have two meta lessons in my life that are just woven into my mitochondria, which are, number one, if the people are hurting, if there's a problem, building's on fire, you go in. And it's going to get you hurt. It's going to be exhausting. It might be the end of you, but you go in. When everybody's running out, you go in. And the other one is, I just have a roadmap. There's no such thing as you can't, or, I don't know how, or I'm too old. Those words can't exist because I've seen it. And my mom, going from a woman, we think all this stuff was a million years ago. When my mom got married to my dad in 1970, she was not allowed to get a checking account without his signature. That was 1973 in this country. Like, my mom was not allowed to get a mortgage, was not allowed to do anything. She couldn't get a checking account. And so to go from, honey, can I go get a bank account? Well, you don't need that. That kind of ethos, which was our whole country, to do. She just did her last summer in Oxford, and she's in her 70s this past summer. I just grew up with a lot of, I grew up with very few excuses for what comes next. And so I went out to college in Lubbock and ultimately got connected with some folks, and I've really pursued sitting with hurting people. Most of my career has been a dean of students and a professor, just a nerd of nerds, but sitting with students whose parents had passed away, they'd done something to get themselves arrested, or sexual assault interviews, or any number of sitting in hospitals, calling parents and telling their kid had passed away. And so that's where most of my career has been spent. And then about a decade ago, I fell apart. And so I got a second PhD in counseling, trying to figure out what happened to me, what happened to my family, what was happening to my friends' marriages, to our country. So the last decade especially, I've been really tuned into what's happening with mental health and with emotional health and just the madhouse world we've created for ourselves almost overnight.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And it became a podcast. Like my son, I was arguing with him a few months ago, and I was like, I was the chief student affairs officer at $1 billion university, Belmont here in Nashville. And he goes, Dad, you're just a YouTuber. You're going to have to get over it. That hurts, man. That hurts.
Well, it's crazy to think, in this day and age, crazy for me to think. So I turned 50 this year. Okay, so.
You're old. I'm just kidding.
I know.
Awesome.
If you couldn't tell with my beard.
You look good. You look good for 50.
Yeah. Thank you. But the reality for me is this whole conversation, mental health and emotional well-being and anxiety and stress, it's so foreign to me. Growing up in New England with two high-achieving parents and generationally never really contemplating these things. In fact, this idea of mental health is really, for me, kind of been the last 8 years, a journey of trying to figure out how to rewire my brain to think about the reality around, okay, this isn't a weakness, this is the human condition. And we're kind of destined to struggle with these things. But coming from someone who's feels unprepared each and every day, to have these kind of conversations, maybe just kind of kick us off with maybe demystifying, and maybe that's the wrong word, but these conversations and making them more part of the daily, practice to have realistic conversations, not as clinical, obviously, but as community. How can we engage with this topic that seems so ethereal or kind of outside of our comfort zone?
I mean, there's so much to that question. I think we've created a culture where we enter every room butt crack first. We enter every room with our labels of what's wrong with us and what's going wrong in our life, and we have no cultural entry point for here's what's going well in my life. And so I think the most countercultural thing we can do these days that also helps us be a loved one, and a friend and a family member and a neighbor and a church member and a community member and a citizen that can best honor those who are struggling is to sit down and say, hi, my name is John. How are you? And not say, well, what's your diagnosis? Or, well, what's been happening? And what happened to you when you were a kid? Because that's not the most interesting part of your story. The most interesting part of your story is that you and I both found ourselves here at this coffee shop, at this bar, at this restaurant, in this situation. And I'd love to get to know you better. Because I think at the root of it all is this terrifying question. Do you see me? Do you really know me? Really? The good stuff and the bad stuff and the dark stuff. And do you still love me? Will you still be here?
Yeah.
And we have a culture that says, hey, you are the worst thing that ever happened to you. You are your marginalization status. That's all you're ever going to be. Your ancestors were treated this way. You're treated this way. You're never going to be enough. Somebody's got to come save you. You stay on the margins, and we'll make sure that we can clear the deck for you. That's so disempowering. It's so disempowering. And so there's something powerful about saying, you have been through hell, and I love you. Come sit with me, and we're going to walk together. Tell me your story. And so I just don't have any use anymore for people identify. I want to know the best things going on in your life. What are you excited about? Tell me how your kids are doing, even if they're not doing great. Tell me how your romantic relationships are going. Tell me about your pets, for God's sake. Let's begin entering rooms with our best foot forward. And if we get to traumas and tragedies, we'll get there. But that's not the way we enter. That's not the way to make connections. Entering into a room with the worst things about ourselves. And so I'm not going to entertain it when I sit down with somebody. I'm going to sit down and say, hey, man, my name is John. I'm so blessed that you're here. What's your name? And we're going to start there.
Yeah, I love that. It really does help in a conversation that we want to be careful with whenever we're talking about relationships. And I know I have a lot of care, but that really stems from empathy, I think, not so much dogma around what you should or shouldn't think. But this really helps demystify some of this as just showing up as yourself and what's going on.
I don't think we're broken. The last 200 years, the psychological community has convinced us that if you feel X, if you feel depressed or you feel anxious or you have ADHD, that there's something wrong with you. You have a pathology to be solved. And I remember about a decade ago sitting in a nerd lecture and somebody was talking about ADHD and the genetic component to it. And I remember they turned and said, hey, this can't be fully genetic because genes don't work that way. It's not that they all got, like, that everybody's genes changed overnight here in the world. There's something else going on. And I remember leaving that lecture thinking, what if our bodies are telling us the truth? What if our anxiety is right? Our bodies are trying to get our attention that we've created a world for that is the world our bodies aren't designed to live in. What if it's trying to tell us, hey, I know you're sharing a bed with a woman you've been married to for 20 years and you're 6 inches from each other, but you are 6,000 miles apart from each other. And I would be failing you, my body says, if I let you sleep all night, knowing that your ride or die got one foot out the door. It'd be failing me. And so we wake up at 2:30 in the morning, and what do? We don't look at that as an alarm system and as a moment of curiosity. Why does my body keep waking me up? It detects something's not okay. Instead, we wallpaper over it and we take something and we have another drink and we ignore it. And eventually, as the great Vanderkolk says, the body keeps the score. Eventually, it's going to get our attention. I just reject the fact that we're all malfunctioning at the same time. I don't think we're broken nearly as much as I think all of our bodies collectively are letting us know the culture and world we've created is not healthy or sustainable.
Yeah. No, I think that's powerful, right? Like we take the symptoms of what we're feeling and can mistake that for our identity, or we can go from unawareness to over-awareness and kind of overcompensate with, I feel all these things, maybe I am all these things. Or even this idea that I'm the only one feeling these things. And so I love that you normalize, like, yeah, anxiety is just your body trying to tell you something. Press into what it's trying to tell you. So how do we start, just whether individually or as a culture, how do we start to take steps out of this?
There's two big, there's a whole bunch of them actually. I don't want to be all dramatic. And I think there's two important places to start. Number one is we've created the loneliest generation in human history. And we simply cannot have any sort of physical health, emotional health, mental health, spiritual. You can't have any sort of well-being built on a foundation of isolation. Your body won't let you. It's not designed to do life by itself.
Yeah.
And this West Texas myth, I used to joke that I was born in the place where they raised the cows, and then I lived for 20 years in the place where they process the cows and make the leather of the bootstraps we're all supposed to pull ourselves up by. It's not true. It's a myth. It's not real. And if your body feels that you are alone, it instantly divides the worlds up into us and them, period. And you end up creating communities not by what you're going to solve together, but who you all hate together. And it's just biology, right? There's a threat right over there, and we have to address it. And you hate that threat, let's go get it. And so I think a place to start is you have to choose connection. You have to choose to go make friends. You have to choose to put yourself in awkward, weird, uncomfortable positions. And you can't let that high school football text thread of 4 or 5 buddies that's still running this many years later, or your buddies who got out of the military at the same time. You can't just keep those same long text threads and lie to yourself that you've got midnight people to call in the middle of the night when you need help. Because you don't. You've got buddies in other states and other cities via text thread, and you'll send hilarious memes, and it's fun. That's not connection, right? So I think that's a big one. The second one is we have pathologized. We've made the enemy of our culture being uncomfortable, discomfort. And I love leather seats, man. I grew up in Texas. I love air conditioner. Y'all really loved air conditioners this past summer. I love air conditioning. I love heaters. I love being comfortable. I do. But in an effort to solve for, you know what I really don't like? Don't like the discomfort of being hungry for weeks at a time. Let's all solve for food. I don't like being worried about water, having to walk 5 miles for clean water. Let's just solve for water. In an effort to solve for some of the things that have plagued humanity all throughout history, we've begun to demonize ever feeling uncomfortable. At first it was, what we wear, and then it becomes how we get around town. Now, if your car doesn't have leather seats that are heated and whatever, it's like, oh my gosh, right? And that leads to, if I'm comfortable all the time, then you can't say that thing because that makes me feel uncomfortable. And discomfort is the enemy, and so you're my enemy now. And then you get into this weird imaginary discomfort worlds where you have said this thing that I don't like in an imaginary platform called the social media, the internets, where we have imaginary relationships that aren't super real, but they affect my body in the real world. And now I have to, you see what I'm saying? They just create this weird ecosystem. And Michael Easter, in his book, The Comfort Crisis, it's a masterpiece. But ultimately, the human body is designed for discomfort. It's designed to carry heavy things. It's designed to move long distances at slow paces. It's designed to lift, to carry heavy burdens as a community. It's designed to do hard things. And when it doesn't have that stress, it spins itself out and it becomes unmanageable. And so I think there's something powerful about injecting fractals, injecting discomfort into our lives, whether that's going to the gym, that's having regular hard conversations with our spouse, going back to a faith community that we left because they said things we didn't agree with, calling friends that we lost during the pandemic and saying, hey, I don't act rationally when I'm scared and terrified too. We got 20 years of history and we haven't talked for 2.5 years. I'm buying if you want to come out. I think there's something about finding ways we can put discomfort back in our life because that's the only path towards healing and growth here. So discomfort and community and friendship. And I think that's a good platform to then begin this idea of building a life worth living, building a peaceful, non-anxious existence.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's, the community piece is something we're super passionate about. We've recognized, and I think all have stories of times in our lives when we've felt that true loneliness and isolation. And it is terrifying. And you feel like you can't go anywhere from that. But misery loves company. And so you try and bring other people down. And so wanting to create community for people where, the negative and hard things in our life can come out. But like you said, they're not the main thing about us. But how would you say, to create like true community? You talked about a lot of like social media and the internet and a lot of ways that we try and, just pretend that we're connected, that we have this long list of friends, of people. But I think most people at the end of the day, especially once you get out into the workplace and you're not in that same season all the time as your friends you were growing up, how do you actually create like that authentic community where you could call in the middle of the night if something were? What is some advice you would give? What does it actually look like for people? What could they do?
I'm working through this myself right now. Man, it's tough. It's tough. I think there's a couple of things to think through. The first one is, like I said earlier, a choice to be by yourself. And I'm not talking about solitude. That's an important spiritual practice. That's an important just human existence practice, right? The ability to be alone by yourself. That's important. That's not what I'm talking about. And by the way, I don't care if you're introverted or extroverted. This still applies. It's the understanding that if your body scans the environment and finds that you are lonely, and especially men, the data would suggest you can be surrounded by people who love you. You can be lonely in a crowded room. You can be lonely at a dinner table surrounded by people who love you, but don't fully understand what you're wrestling with. Women can too, obviously, but that's just something that emerges from the literature. The men just shut up and they smile and their kids have no idea, and their wife and spouse and friends and romantic partners have no idea that they're melting the way they are. I think you have to understand when you choose loneliness, and I'm being intentionally provocative with that language, you choose loneliness, you are choosing to die early. And you're choosing to die a more miserable death of despair. And you're going to take people down with you because they're in your presence, but you're a ghost. They're grabbing for you to love you whatever way they can, and you're just a vapor. You're not there. So you end up making everybody else feel crazy because you're right there. And so I think on a platform of, if I choose loneliness, I'm choosing to die early. Then I have to know, okay, I got to go do this weird, awkward thing. I wish there was a 10-step plan to like make friends as an adult that, like, when you're a kid, they stick you on the same stupid kickball team. And if you're one of those geeks and you like love like kickball like I did, then those end up being your friends, like the nerds that talk about kickball all day. And then if you're like too cool for kickball and you think it's stupid and you have like a Hello Kitty backpack and like a chain wallet and you're in 3rd grade, then those become your friends. Those who like, right? So we had all this community built into our life, and then middle school and then high school and then college. And then you graduate college, you get out of the Army, or you get done with your trade program, and it is literally you versus the world, right? At 24, if you don't make that if you make that sale, it's because that guy didn't, and you took food off his family's plate. It's game on from here on out. And so I think it becomes our main objective is I got to put myself in uncomfortable situations. I got to go first, which means I got to invite people out, and if they say no, that's on them. I'm not going to own that. That's okay. And the second thing is I've got to be vulnerable and weird. I got to invite people into my house. I got to invite people into my sacred spaces, if you will. That's my bar. That's where I go. All right, you can come too. Weird guy from work. I hope you don't ruin this for me. And you have to start putting ourselves in awkward, uncomfortable positions. And if there's 10 people we invite, 4 of them will show up. 2 of them will be weird. 1 guy will just be cool, but whatever. And then 1 dude will be like, that's my guy, right? That dude likes fighting and guitars, and he studies mental health, and he likes his wife, and he loves his kids, and it's, you know what I mean? Like, that's my guy, right? And I think from there, you just keep being weird, and you share experiences together.
Yeah, it's so scary. Yeah, you know, it's for me, it's terrifying to think that it takes those steps of vulnerability for a guy who just didn't grow up in a home where that was modeled. And so it's a really tough decision every day, especially when again, this is where we have this real love for community, because there's so many lies up here that just dictate like who I perceive myself to be. And then you go down this path of like, well, that's just not lovable. So I live a lot like on the outside of my person. So I'm very outspoken. I walk into a room, everybody knows I'm there, very extroverted. And, you know, there's a lot of rejection that comes with that kind of a personality, or at least perceived rejection. And so everything you're saying, it's like, yeah, man, I want that. I want that like 3 years from now after I've done all the weird, vulnerable stuff.
That's right.
But in the meantime, I get locked down into this thinking that, well, there's this persona of who I either perceive myself to be or who I think they perceive me to be, that just, it's like it creates that a massive amount of like fear and tension that exists. And it's now, going back to what you said before, it's like the discomfort of trading. Some days I feel a little bit braver to do it. Other days I withdraw and I'm like, nope, he's not a lovable person, to be able to put it out there. So everything you're saying, it just resonates so deeply because it sits there for us to do, but we often just aren't willing to take those steps because it's hard.
Well, I think our current cultural ethos has accidentally become, you're a burden. The world would be better if you weren't there bothering everybody. Well, don't ask me to take you to the airport. Uber. They solved that problem. Dude, stop asking me to borrow a jar of spaghetti sauce. They have like a delivery app. Just click the button, man. And over time, like solving some of these really cool problems, man, we get this message, oh yeah, just our presence is burdensome to other people. And then we have to create these characters that we walk into rooms with because we don't like ourselves. We don't think that anyone else has any need for us, that we're taking up space. And so I create a big dog and pony show, external validation, like, hey, everybody, it's just me. And I wear big clothes because I don't think if you saw what my body actually looked like, you would know I'm disgusting. and I'm gross and I'm burdensome and I feel bad for my spouse who has to see me. Like, and there you create the alter ego, which is I'm going to be a wallflower. I'm safest if nobody sees me. I'm going to enter into the space and try to be like a ghost and then get in and out, and I'll have a tiny connection. I was just finishing a book yesterday about depression, and the author had a really important point. He said, it's very hard to ruminate when you are in an active conversation with somebody else. And he was suggesting that one of the quote unquote cures for depression is just simply engage in meaningful conversation with other people. Your brain can't spin out on you when you're having an invested conversation with somebody. That was enough for me, right? To say, all right, I need to make sure I'm putting myself in a position. And by the way, communication is not connection. And I'm talking about this probably ad nauseum, but I can text my wife 100 times today that I love you. You're beautiful. I love you. And we know that 70 to 90% of communication is nonverbal. I cannot find that study, but I'm going to keep repeating it because it backs up everything I want to say. So I'm going to have some internet statistics there and just make it up. But I am choosing to only communicate with my wife with 15 or 20% of our being by texting her, you're beautiful, I love you, you're beautiful, I'm so glad I'm married to you. And I walk in the front door, I've told her 100 times today. I don't need to say it again. I have to go about the business of household management or the business of being a dad or the business of fixing whatever. And so her body is screaming, do you love me? Do you see me? And intellectually, I know, I told you 100 times today. Intellectually, she knows that. But I communicated with her. I did not connect with her. So there's something about texting my old high school buddies. Dude, you did this. You dropped the ball in the game, or you did this. Oh, your kid won a game. Congratulations. That's awesome. I'm not connecting with him. I'm communicating. I'm staying afloat. I'm treading water. If we use that platform to then get together once a month, just to look at each other and go, dude, how are you? Well, I'm fine. Why do you always ask that? I'm going to ask it again. I'm going to ask it again because the sixth time we get together, I'm going to say, how are you? And you'd be like, dude, my mom's got cancer. And now we're in it, right? And so there's something about showing up and showing up and showing up and just putting yourself out there to be weird. And then fighting the urge after you've put yourself out there to be weird to play by play every conversation you had and every feeling you had on the drive all the way home. And all night, and then into the morning. I can't believe I said this. I need to text them right when I get home just to make sure we're cool. Everything's fine. You had fun. They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves and how weird they were. And so it's just this, I'm not a burden. And if they don't like me, I'm okay. That's on them. I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm not going to carry those cinder blocks around with me anymore.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, and I love how you said you go first.
Yeah.
I think we all want somebody else to do that for us. We want people to fix our loneliness. And so if we all want that, then somebody's got to step out and be the first to do that. And what a gift that is for yourself to go and ask for it, but what a gift that is to offer to somebody else who's scared to ask for it too. And if we can all kind of have that perspective, it's for you and it's for somebody else each time you put yourself first in that and extending that invite.
If you're romantically involved with somebody, or you're a parent, or you're an employee, just know, if you take care of those relationships and friendships, and the ride or dies, it allows you to fully show up on the other end. And so there's dads and moms across the country that are so terrified if they miss a t-ball game or a soccer game that their kids will never recover from the trauma. You weren't there for me. You know what they really desperately want is a mom and dad whose nervous system is regulated, and a mom and dad who aren't getting their entire sense of the coming and goings of planet Earth from some news channel that has no vested interest in telling the truth. Just getting you to watch it out of fear of what's going to happen next. And the way we do that is by being with other people. So skip a game every once in a while and go be with your friends. Skip a game every once in a while and go out of town with a group of girlfriends or a group of guy friends. Go on that hunting trip and don't take your kids. Just go, because you'll come back whole. Once a year, my company that I work for here in Nashville puts on this massive, I'm talking crazy town, Battle of the Bands. And everyone comes to Nashville to make it, right? Kind of like Austin. They come here to make it, and then they have to get real jobs, and they get married and have kids and stuff. And So the talent level in this building, there's about 1,000 employees here at Ramsey Solutions. The talent level is, to say it's astounding, it's next level. I mean, it's like, oh, that guy was the touring drummer or whatever, and that guy was on the American Idol, and this guy, like, she's a secretary, but she's the best singer. And so once a year, there's this big battle of bands, and bands start practicing about 4 months out. It is not a high school talent show. It is like world class. You better be as good as Green Day, or you're going to get booed out of the place. And my wife, I never have time for that. I got 2 young kids. I'm married. I live out in the woods. I'm traveling the country all the time, meeting with businesses and doing speaking events and running my own radio show and stuff. And my wife says, oh, you'll do that every year because I get a better husband and my kids get a better dad and I get a better, like, the world gets a better you because you're playing music with your buddies. And so there's just something powerful about getting with other people. You just got to go first. You got to go first. You got to go first.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear you say it, and it's I think it's important to keep hearing it. Like it gets old maybe, but the reality of my mom telling me as a kid, "Hey, if you want to have friends, you got to be a friend." And this is just a more complicated or more gutsy way of saying it. But if you really love people, it's hard to see yourself when you're so focused on loving someone. And I mean that in the self-sacrificial way of loving someone and being a friend, or again, having a relationship and having that community. It works the same way. Like Kenzie said, the reality is we all want people to invite us. We all want to be the recipient of that. So the moment we kind of step out and do that, we are in that moment fighting for unity, which is, our theme for the year is this idea that this is a fight. This is something you're going to have to engage with and think of as something worth sacrificing a bit of your pride, maybe a bit of your ego, maybe just a bit of your false humility, whatever you want. You've got to sacrifice something to enter into this fray, or else, like you said, you're going to die lonely, miserable, and early.
Let me tell you something that happened to me. I may have talked about this a few years ago at that event you were at. Man, I was really impressed with myself. I have all the right answers all the time. And I was a quote-unquote crisis expert. I got 2 PhDs. This is what I do. I'm going to tell 2 quick stories that are instructive. One is we had several years, my wife and I, where we thought we were just going to start a family, and it never happened. And it kept not happening. It kept not happening. And then my son, Hank, came along, and we were so excited. And then my wife transitioned out of her fancy pants research career job, and she's like, dude, I've got this weird, strange feeling that I'm supposed to be a stay-at-home mom. And she fought it. I fought it. I was like, dog, you're such a gangster there. And I love being a two-income home so I can buy guitars. And anyway, it was like this, like, but she's like, I have this strange thing. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then we had miscarriage number 1, and then there was miscarriage number 2, and then there was the third one that was an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured, and my wife was a gangster West Texas girl, and she said, I'm going to sit in my living room, and this isn't happening. And if you were to think about a ruptured ectopic pregnancy, like, she almost bled out in our home. And so she drove herself to, by the way, before we get there, every time, thank goodness for her, she was married to a quote-unquote crisis expert. So I was able to academize it all away and give her the theories and the ideas and dude, I just took her pain and I ground her down in my charts and graphs and quote unquote right answers. And I've never been more ashamed of, instead of being there for her, I was there to lecture and to give all the answers. She didn't need my answer. She's really freaking smart. What she needed was her husband to show up. And I was so insecure that I had any value outside of utility and my quote-unquote right answers, and that my presence had any value at all. I just kept entering into her heartache and our heartache with my hand stiff arm, right? And then that third time, I showed up to the hospital, and I was doing crisis work with the police department there in Lubbock for several years, in addition to my dean of students job there at Texas Tech at the law school. And I showed up and I looked across the room at the head of the OBGYN that had my wife. My wife was slumped over in a wheelchair. And I looked and made eye contact with the head doctor. And there was a phrase, we call it crazy eyes. You show up to a scene and there can be people who have passed away. There can be blood and gut. There can be the whole thing. But you look across the room and you make eye contact with the first responders or the EMS guys or the police department or whoever, and you know the scene is still. It's under control. It's a mess, and there's a lot of hurting people, but it's under control. And then there's something called crazy eyes, which is very rare, and you look up across the room and you realize, oh, this one's live. This is bad deal. Still ongoing. And I remember making eye contact with the doctor who was running my wife down a hall at the hospital. And I had Hank, my son, was probably 3 at the time. And I remember thinking, oh God, this is the last time I see my wife alive ever. And somebody came in, I texted a friend to come pick up my son, and she told her husband. And the guy, his name's Nathan. He's a West Texas Ranger. He's a children's author and a middle school teacher. He showed up to the hospital, sitting there by myself during this emergency surgery. And it just 5 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour. And then in walks this big, tall guy with a cowboy hat on. And he sits down next to me. He says 0 words, none. And then another 30 minutes goes by, another hour goes by. And then the doctor comes in and says, we couldn't save the baby, but your wife is going to be okay. And I didn't realize I've been holding her breath for a few hours, and I exhaled, and then he reached over and grabbed my shoe. I'd crossed my legs, and I was just sitting there bouncing my leg on my knee. He grabs my foot. He grabs my shoe, and I look over at him, and he is crying tears that I can't even cry yet. And he said 0 words. And so we think about, I think we have to be careful about the fight language, because you're right. We got to show up and do something different and swim upstream. But when I think of fighting, I think of throwing punches and I think of yelling. And I think this fight moving forward is a fight of surrender. I have all the answers, and look around. My answers aren't working. Will you sit down and have a drink with me? And I'm going to show up in your space, and I know you're hurting, and I don't know what diagnosis you have, and I don't know the words that you need to hear, but I have enough value in my presence. I'm going to show up and just be here. And what I found is that was one of the most holy moments of my whole life. And when we got up, hugged, and we talked for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and he went home. And it was a presence of great power. And so feel free to not know the right things to say. In fact, say nothing. Just show up. Show up and say, hey, what I'm doing is not working. I'm in if you are. And I don't even know what that means. Nobody has ever got on social media and been like, you're right, I was wrong. That's never happened. That has never happened. But what about in this new season when we're all falling apart, if we sat down and said, I don't know, man, but I like you. Let's figure this out. I don't like you. Let's figure this out. Yeah. I think the fight's going to, our tools for fighting are going to look different in the season. But as you said, it's going to be an uphill, doing something different, vulnerable season.
I love that. So good. Yeah.
Well, sorry, did I just make it weird? See, that's what no. Parties, I make it all weird.
No, it's impactful. Yeah, it's so valuable to be reminded of each other's humanity. And like you said before, we're not typically. I'm hardly ever reviewing how anybody else necessarily, treated me in that moment as much as I'm fixated on how I was in a moment, and kind of the spotlight effect, and just thinking, okay, well, how can I just be in that moment for someone? I don't have the right words. I don't have to say some sage counsel.
Just show up.
Just show up. Yeah.
Just show up. Grab their shoe.
Yeah.
Right? Go up and grab their shoe. Say, can I hug you?
Yeah.
If you don't know them that well. That can be kind of weird, I guess, if you go in there and just start hugging people and be like, I don't know that guy.
Listen, weird, but my friend Dr. John said I'll hug you.
Show up and say nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that feels like a good challenge to pause on, right? There's so many different ways we could try and manufacture the right answer, right? Like how do I have to, we can overcomplicate this thing, I think is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But just to step into somebody else's world or step out of our place of comfort for the sake of someone else.
Yeah.
So that they would feel known and heard.
That's been, the word you just used has been something that's really haunted me the last 3 years since I transitioned out of being a nerd. I'm still a nerd. My kids would stamp that with their approval. But working out, like not having a research agenda and not being a professor or in higher ed, man, we've overcomplicated everything.
Yeah.
We have way overcomplicated humanity.
Yeah.
Way overcomplicated. During COVID, I had to get outside. I had to move my body. I had a 10-year-old boy stuck in the house. We were downtown, so I couldn't just run to the woods. Everything was closed. And so, and I had this impulse to help, but I didn't know what to do, right? And so my son and I would just get trash sacks and go on these long marathon walks. And we would pick up trash in the neighborhood. And I learned all about his inner world. And we got some exercise. And it was like, those were holy moments with a father and a son. And we got to make the neighborhood a little nicer. And we got to model for neighbors sitting in their houses not knowing what to do. Oh, I guess we could go pick up trash. And we got some exercise. Like, it's not complicated. And there's like a 10-step online program, how to get connected with your kid. Go outside and fill up a hole in the ground with mud in it and with a hose. And you start smearing mud on your kid and let them smear mud on you. That's it. That's your 10-step program right there. It's just not hard. And I've got to own this as a part of that community. We've overcomplicated everything. We've made everything a theory and an idea and a what do you think or what do you think or what do you think. Here's a funny thing. In fact, it was that same doctor that had crazy eyes. She ended up being the OBGYN that followed us up and ended up doing the emergency surgery. And she was also the doctor her team delivered my daughter that came along a year and a half later. And so we got to be really close. And she was at the med school side at Texas Tech and I was at the law school side. So we had each other's email addresses. And so I was always emailing her. I was probably way too much. But I was abusing our colleague status to get medical information but I would send her these things. And so I learned this. I used to ask smart people all the time, what do you think? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And people would tell me about the last 10 blogs they've read and the last 10 podcasts they've listened to and the last whatever Huberman Lab podcast they listened to and what Dr. Atiyah said recently. But then I would see them with their kids and they would do something totally different. Like I just asked you what you thought and you think this is terrible. And I remember thinking, asking you what you think versus what you do with your kids are two different questions. And so I would talk to these law professors who were geniuses. They had computing power in their head that was like a Ferrari to my Honda Accord. I couldn't compete. So they were wired. They'd been reading articles and writing for years. They could tell me all kinds of things that they thought. Very different than how they acted with their families or their kids. And so I've just started asking the question. I remember leaving the doctor's office and I said, hey, while I got you, is DEET bad for kids? Is bug spray bad for kids? And she just exhaled and smiled, and because I've been doing this all the time, she goes, yes, I think bug spray is probably not great. I think there's some neurotoxin, blah, blah, blah. But yes, I spray my kids with bug spray because I'm more worried about, whatever. And I thought, there we go. So I don't ask people, what do you think anymore? I just don't ask that question. I ask, what do you do with your kids? Would you buy this piece of real estate? Would you let your kid watch this? Would you hand your kid a smartphone? It's much different than, what do you think about social media? It's the worst. It's all coming down. Why did you give your kid a cell phone? Because, I don't want them to be alone. Okay, that tells me what you really think about social media. You don't think it's that big a deal. Or you're a super insecure parent, right? So either way, I just quit asking that question because it's not helpful. What do you need? What do you do at home with your kids? Yeah. That's how I'm going to come together. Now, what do you think about, this political thing? Do you care really that our kids are safe in school? Can we start there? Because I think we all agree on that. Can we all just agree that our parents are kind of weird? And let's start there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if we sit down, I think we're going to agree a lot more on those things than we have differences.
Yeah. Good.
I love it.
I love it. I love that you take these big ideas, which could make me anxious, and you boil them down in really practical ways, whether it's in the book, on social media, or on the radio show. So how can our audience kind of start in this conversation with you? How can we get connected to what you're doing?
You can pick up, I feel like a TV show, like for 1995, supposed to be in it. I've got a book coming out called Building a Non-Anxious Life, which is really just a roadmap. It's me taking all the neuroscience and, all the thousands of years of ancient wisdom that we've just kind of watered up and thrown away because it's not shiny anymore. If anxiety is just an alarm system letting us know that things aren't okay and we're not safe, then how can I begin to build a life where that alarm's not ringing off the hook 24/7, 365? And so you pick up Building a Non-Anxious Life anywhere you get books. It's actually in pre-sale now. It comes out October 3rd. So I don't know when you're going to release this, but by October 3rd, it will be in every bookstore everywhere. You can get online. And right now you can go to johndelony.com, and then you can follow me on the social snaps or whatever you call it at John Delony. And I don't have Snap. I'm not that cool. But on Instagram, TikTok, all that's at John Delony. And like you say, most of the time it's me having messed something up in my house, said something to my daughter who's 7, not been the husband I wanted to be. And I like to take those quick moments and write notes to myself. And I'm finding a lot of common humanity by going vulnerable first, not problem first, and not lecture first, and not bribe first. But, dude, I want to be a good dad. I wasn't today. Going vulnerable first. Do you see me? Do you still love me? And I'm finding that a lot of people are like, yeah, man, me too. Me too.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you taking that step and going first and being vulnerable because, yeah, I think everybody's looking for ways to unite around the struggles that we all face. Yep. So thank you for doing that. And thanks for chatting with us.
Yeah.
This has been great.
Awesome. Well, awesome. I'll see y'all in a few weeks, I guess.
Yes. 2.5. We are getting
2.5 weeks. I'm looking forward to it. We're gonna have a blast.
Yeah. Awesome.
We're gonna have a blast.
Awesome.
All right, love y'all. Stay in school. Don't do drugs, and please go have some queso for me. Please today. It's like some good Texas queso.
Well, awesome. If you say so.
All right, we're in.
Sorry, doctor. He said I had to.
That's right.
Hey, appreciate y'all.
All right,
Sean.
Thanks, Ben.
Bye.